that right now. Okay. We're live on Facebook and
George Kilpatrick.
All right. We got 1 minute. Hey, Brandon, how are you?
Good, good. How are y'all feeling?
I'm feeling
Doing
good.
well this evening, brother.
Good, good.
Okay.
Hear those sirens in the background. That's what we're talking about this evening.
It's the Syracuse.
Good.
Yeah.
I try to stay muted when I'm not talking because we might hear it a few times.
Hey, it's context, bro.
Well, I'm just looking for Dr. Ish. I don't see him yet, but I will just go ahead on and say hello to everyone. Good evening, George Kilpatrick Inspiration for the Nation. We serve people that we feel good about. We are the show that celebrates the positive achievements of African Americans from all walks of life. And tonight's conversation is something that I've wanted to do for some time, which is destigmatize the role that mental health plays in our community. The Black Mental Health Alliance has a number of statistics that suggest that Black men in particular are least likely to seek mental health services, and corresponding with that, a number of traumas associated with that. So what we do, we got brothers who happen to be therapists in their own right to bring together a conversation with the theme, we are not okay. But through this conversation, we hope that we will be okay. Black men healing. So who's on our distinguished panel tonight? I'm just gonna go with the first name I've got here. Dr. Lawrence Jackson, the Black male therapist, is an assistant professor of couple and family therapy at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, UNLV. His areas of research include racial disparities and inequalities in education and influential factors that influence Black male academic achievement and mental health outcomes. Additionally, as a clinician, Dr. Jackson enjoys outreach and community engagement through his social media platforms, such as his Instagram at the Black Male Therapist. Dr. Duane McClure is a licensed clinical mental health counselor in the state of North Carolina and a licensed clinical professional counselor in the state of Maryland. He has more than 20 years experience in higher ed, agency counseling, consulting with the military, and in private practice. He practices clinically under his MS in counseling, and his clinical background focuses on individual, adult, family stress, anxiety, depression, and phase of life concerns. He's got a doctorate of management and organizational leadership and holds a graduate certificate in organizational development. Dr. Tyrone Grandison, hot off the press, completing his doctorate at the Nova Southeastern University, an avid believer that oftentimes his clients already possess all the tools they need to facilitate the change they're looking for within their lives. However, they may be lacking the proper environment needed to process and achieve this. He has training in a multitude of concentrations, allowing him the ability to effectively assess and aid his clients using multiple perspectives. He also says that his systemic lens in therapy allows him to be more effective in joining with individuals experiencing personal difficulties and issues with family or partners, especially in sports, entertainment, and art industry. How about that? And Brandon Hollie is a PhD candidate, an MBA student whose expertise is in overcoming the struggles of poverty, working with community violence, grief and loss, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and developer of the free therapeutic services being offered through the Syracuse Community Connections right here in Syracuse, New York. So thumbs up. So all the therapists, I want y'all to just give me a thumbs up real quick so everybody can see who you are, that y'all are. Yes, yes, yes. And I thank you for joining us. All right, let's get to it. And hopefully Dr. Ish will join us any minute now. So just some agreements. If you're not one of our therapists, we ask you to mute your microphone. And we're also on Facebook Live, so if you want to chat us up over there, please do that. And also use the chat feature here in the Zoom platform. So with that, let me start with the question of we are not okay. What is the significance of acknowledging this? And I will start with Duane McClure, Dr. Duane McClure.
What is the significance of not acknowledging this? If I can answer that question, maybe with a bit of a tweak, I think historically there have been adaptive ways that we've tapped into that are very much connected to our mental health. Traditionally, they might have been coming through, if we go way back, through Negro spirituals and through gospels and through the church of sorts, definitely through spirituality. As communities develop and bring in more people and more professionals, we include those adaptive strategies that we've always had within the community, and we add to some of those strategies. I would say my experience in the last 10 years or so, that I've definitely seen more men taking a leaning towards mental health. Still, we know that those challenges are out there. So in general, I want to make sure I give all the panelists a chance to comment on this, but I always want to affirm the progress and the development that we are going in. There's so much research and so much literature out there suggesting how bad things are that I want to acknowledge some of that space and promote towards the better angels of sorts. So we are progressing, we are getting on board, and I'm sure many of us are seeing a boom within telehealth practice and engagement in the community. So it's my first lean on that. Thank you.
And let me also,
and thank you for hosting this forum. Thank you so much.
You're welcome for that. And let me just bring in our last panelist, Dr. Ish Major, has spent the last 15 years demystifying the male psyche and helping men and women navigate their way through the dating jungle. Educated at the University of South Carolina School of Medicine, Dr. Ish is a board-certified psychiatrist who specializes in women, children, and families and all things dating. He's been named one of the America's top psychiatrists and is the host of WeTV's hit series, Marriage and Family Boot Camp Reality Stars. And the question, Dr. Ish, that we've asked our panelists to address, and I'll get to you in a second, but the question is this idea of are not okay, why should we acknowledge this? And we already had a little bit of pushback even on that. What's the significance of acknowledging this? But as we get around to you, that's the question that we're tapping. Let me go to Dr. Lawrence Jackson, the Black male therapist.
And so I think some of the implications of not acknowledging that is not being able to do things to directly make changes to the experience that we have within our society. I'm a firm believer of awareness means opportunity for change. You can't change things that you're not aware of. And without being aware that this is affecting you or impacting you and that you're not okay, you're less likely to make changes that are going to be able to tend to or cater to what you're trying to overcome. And so I think by not acknowledging that, you're not acknowledging the need in a space or the resources that you need to do to allow yourself to get past it, because you're not even acknowledging that it's happening for you first and foremost.
All right. So let's begin. Let's continue. Brandon Hollie, what do you think?
Yeah, when I think about the concept of we aren't okay, to me, I think that we've traditionally had to put on his cape and his mask to say that we aren't, right? Like we have this symbolist feeling as if we have to be almighty, all strong, and can't show any vulnerabilities, any weaknesses. And that all vulnerabilities are weaknesses, when really there's so much positives that come out of being vulnerable. We just don't know how to do so in a way that allows us to make change, allows us to think and move differently. And so that's what I think of when I think about this concept of we aren't okay.
Dr. Grandison.
Yeah, and just to piggyback off of Lawrence and Brandon, the idea of not acknowledging it, in my opinion right now, is I think that we're simply just perpetuating the issues that we're facing present day. Continuing to suppress emotion, continuing not to personally acknowledge our position. And just as Brandon said, we have to put on this cape and, be strong and do this and do that. So by really not taking the time to take a step back and really acknowledge that that's truly what we're doing, to ourselves. And I think that pushes us one step further away from finding the proper solutions to the things that we're facing present day.
Dr. Ish?
Yeah, I mean, it's easy math, right? You can't heal what you are afraid to reveal. So the defense of, we live most of our lives in defense to things that have happened to us. So what's happened to us? Well, hell, we were whipped and beaten and broken in a lot of different ways. So the defense to that is to be invincible. Nothing's ever going to hurt me. You're not going, and if it does hurt me, I'm certainly not going to let you see it. And so a lot of us have been walking around for these last couple of generations trying to pretend that we're Iron Man, that we're stone, that we're invincible, that nothing hurts us. And what it does is it keeps us from taking that real look inward in doing the work. Because if we stop down and do that work, how do I show back up and suit up tomorrow? Because I got to go back to work tomorrow and look at these people's faces. And I don't know if I'm going to be done doing the work by later on tonight. And so we just continue to put it off and use this distraction over here and that distraction over there. And I've heard some of the other brothers say it, and it keeps you from focusing on what the problem is. And the problem, a big part of that problem is out there, but the fix is in here, and we've been scared to look at it. So you got to do it.
So I see you agreeing, Dr. Duane McClure. By the way, if you are watching this and you have questions, put them in the chat and we'll get to them as soon as we can. But also, as I'm listening to you all, so I'm not certain what I'm hearing. Are Black men seeking mental health services or not? I want to get, are we seeking them or not? Because the statistics show no. Y'all are saying more of us are. So here's the question in that context. I heard someone say Black men in particular need to be vulnerable, more vulnerable. But there's a perception that doing so risks our lives, even as young men, in certain spaces. I want to speak to that because many of us have to put on the mask wherever we are, right? And so, but then you're asking me to be vulnerable. So when is that going to show up, and how do I deal with both of those things? I need to be vulnerable to be healed, but at the same time, I have to mask it because it could cost me my life, depending upon the circumstance I'm in. So I've thrown it out there. Whoever wants to jump in, who wants to get on that?
So if I can just highlight, and I'm not sure, I'll make sure I'm succinct with this. My research and my dissertation was on experiences of African-American men in roles of leadership, and I explored fraternal experiences. So I basically interviewed men within my fraternity, Phi Beta Sigma, but of course it can be generalized to other fraternities as well. But that spaces of brotherhood and deep kinship, even fictive kinship, can create some of those brotherhood ties. We've even developed this kind of term, who is that ledge, bruh, of sorts, that you could call on at 3 a.m. in case things were rougher than rough. I can pick up the phone, and if you see this number pop up or this caller ID pop up on your screen at 2 and 3 in the morning, that means pick up, because that brother's on the ledge. And I would suggest that any of the listeners right now, can you identify at least 2 men in your life that you have very deep experiences, those brothers that will pull you back from the ledge and give you wise counsel? Not the brothers that might push you over the edge with some of their advice, but some of the brothers have wise counsel, and they're in your community, they're in your neighborhood, they're in your church, they're in your fraternity. They might be even in your family, or some of them might be fictive brothers in the sense that you have developed them along the way. And you know that you can reach out to that man and say, I'm hurt and I need someone to reach out to. So 2, 3 in the morning, pick up the call, because you know what that's about.
So we need those brothers in our lives, right?
That ledge, bro.
And let me add one more context to this. When I think about what's been happening in this country, right? Armaud Arbery, right? George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Sandra Bland, say their names, right? So I'm putting that in the context of how are we navigating through all of this. But Lawrence, did you want to get in there? Dr. Lawrence Jackson?
Yeah, I think one of the things we need to work on doing is creating spaces for Black men to be able to be vulnerable. I think that's something that we need to prioritize, right? Prioritize. And so I think at the core, I think when we check in with each other, it's formalities. I tell my friends what's good, what's popping, how you living, same stuff every single time. But if we really want to get to more to that, we got to start first create a space where we can have some of these discussions. And then we got to ask different types of questions. We can't ask these generic questions and thinking that they're going to be vulnerable with us. Ask my friend what's good, he's going to tell me everything's cool. If I want to know more, I need to ask more direct questions and be more intentional about the things I'm asking to really get at if I want to check in on how is he handling what's happening in society. And I think another part is that we have to model vulnerability, right? And so it's hard to say, I want you to be vulnerable with me, but I'm not going to be vulnerable back with you. And so it's important for us, if we can, to model that vulnerability that we want to our friends to exercise as well. And so that they're more likely to engage in these type of conversations or share these type of feelings with you under these different circumstances and scenarios that we were presented
with. I got this from one of my, from Facebook I haven't been okay in 60 years. I mean, there's some unresolved trauma here. But let me go to you, Brandon, because again, I'm asking the question, you're asking me to be vulnerable, but in certain spaces, that is going to cost me my safety, it feels to me. So, Lawrence, and they're all going to hopefully let me call them by their first names, but they're all doctors, so thank you for that. Right? Do I have that permission? I don't want to, because we're about these titles. So if being vulnerable in certain spaces is what we have to create more of, what happens every day when I don't have those spaces where I can do that? How does that show up?
Yeah, that's a great question, right? And you're right, it's a both and thing. I think that's what we have to realize. It isn't white and black, you know what I mean? There's gray in this. So as Black men, we do have to realize in some contexts, being super vulnerable is harmful for us.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of my work is on community trauma, right? So when you live in neighborhoods that have a lot of violence and such, some vulnerabilities can make you more likely to be a victim of crime, so you have to be tough in those type of situations. But in that same sense, we've learned to be so tough, we learn to be so iron that when we go home and we try to speak to our significant others, we can't be vulnerable because we've already built up this shield, right? When it comes to engaging in brotherhood in general, we can't have those type of conversations because in our world it's so taboo. We've already built up this persona that we have to be tough, when really outside of that context we don't have to be, right? That's why I love when you listen to people right now like Charlemagne the God, and you listen to people like Taraji and Meek Mill, who are actually making it okay to be vulnerable and talk about anxiety, talk about depression. And to piggyback off of what Lauren said, we do have to make those spaces, right? And we do have to model that and pointing it out as well. So I know a lot of times in session, I'll say, if you're walking down the street and you constantly find yourself having to look over your back, or you're constantly worrying about your livelihood, in a way that's unhealthy, but it's also a healthy coping skill to deal with what's going on in your environment, right? So again, it's a both end, and we have to make it salient. When is it okay to be this way, and when is it okay not to be? And it goes back to the title, right? We aren't okay, at least not all the time.
Not all the time.
Right? So to me, that's what I'm thinking of.
All right, I'm gonna get to Tyrone and Ish in a moment, but we do have, I'm just gonna freestyle here. So I got a question. And by the way, let's do, just for the roll call, we got a Sigma, we got a Kappa, Lawrence is a Kappa, QSI in here. So we just did that. All right. This is from Monique, and she says, oh, Alpha, okay, thank you. We got an Alpha over here. So we got Panhandle represented, all right?
It's all too.
Here's a question for you, Dr. McClure. She's thanking you for your commentary, and she wants to know this. Her question is based on the reality that therapy presents some possible relief 1 hour a week. what would you suggest, or how would you suggest the partner of a Black male assist? Tyrone, since you haven't spoken, let me just give you that one.
Yeah, for sure. And it really piggybacks directly off of what we were just talking about in Brandon's comment. And, you know, finding that space to be vulnerable, as we know there's a time and place for everything. And what I was going to say to that question, it kind of trickles into this one as well, is to, you know, even in environments where that could risk your life and things of that sort, it's always good to have that one person in your corner, right? I'm also 100% guilty of being a person who does not necessarily like to be vulnerable with others. It eats me alive to have to talk about myself too much, and that's just the way that we've been conditioned to be. However, I do have, and I've worked hard for that. That I need to really be able to work on these things. I do have 2 or 3 people in my corner that I know I can lean on, that are male or female as well. And even in particular instances where I may turn to my male friend or my female friend, and you're talking about, you know, what can partners of, you know, Black males do, and it is be supportive and tell them to put themselves in that environment where they can find that support and encourage them to actually do so. A lot of the time, it's us trying to be strong and be there for our families.
But those are pretty much the services that I provide. Don't call me if you get arrested.
One second. Somebody, can someone please?
Not your girl.
Somebody's phone is not muted, so please mute yourself if you're not a panelist speaker. Please mute yourself.
Sure.
I think.
Okay. Go ahead.
Yeah. What I was just saying is that those significant others or brothers or sisters or people who are close to them, to really just, you know, pull them aside. And the same thing that Lawrence was saying, speak up. Like, we're not blind. You know, if somebody could potentially be masking something, or especially as clinicians or people working in the field, or when you have family members, sometimes somebody like, oh, am I right? You don't have to take no for an answer. Like, you know, ask those follow-up questions, really be there, and also let them know that it is okay, or maybe point them in the right direction, or be selfless enough to have those conversations with them to kind of open that outlet as well. And I know all of us are working in the community to make these services more accessible to others in ways, and to be those people within our respective environments to allow that space to be there for others who might need it.
Dr. Ish?
Yeah, I love what the brothers are saying. You got to create the space, right? So who's responsible for creating the space? American culture hasn't always allowed for that space. So we can blame them if we want to. But the truth is, we haven't allowed ourselves to have that space, right? And historically, the reason why is because life has been heavy, right? Life has been a lot. Life has been hard. And when we show up, we want to celebrate each other. We don't want to lay my burdens at your doorstep, because I know you got your own burdens. And so it's been one of the ways that we think we're helping to take care of each other. You know what? I'm gonna go see George today, and I'm not gonna tell him about the 10 things that I got going on. I just want to, have a good time and just want to celebrate each other and enjoy that. And I think we do ourselves a disservice in doing that. So how do you create that space? Well, the space starts with what's around you, right? You sweep around your own doorstep. It's like, how do you create the space to have a hard conversation? Well, those best conversations are pregnant with pauses, right? Hey, honey, how was your day today? Pause. And you let him fill the space, right? What's the complaint we get from women all the time? Well, he never talks. He gives me one-word answers. Well, we feel like we don't have the space to give it because you're filling up all the space in the conversation. So you pause the same way you do it here. Hey, you know what? Your partner has to help you create that space by looking at you and being willing to say, hey, you know what? I am scared every time you leave the house. How do you feel? Pause. And don't say anything else until you respond. Right now, you created the space physically for them to fill it, and you let them know it's okay to be terrified and not know, right? And not know how that works. So when we talk about being vulnerable, it's a matter of, and I heard what you're saying, George, with the question, you know what, we need to be strong. We need to be solid because being vulnerable can get you killed. Yeah, I disagree with that. I think the vulnerability is the main thing that's going to keep you alive, right? The issue we're having as Black men, as African men in this country, is that people have a single story about us, right? When I say Africa, boom, an image immediately pops into your mind, right? You got a single story, most of us, about what we think that means, right? When you see, you know, America sees a young Black man walking down the street and he's dressed in urban wear, boom, they got an immediate story that pops into their mind, right? People see a fit brother walking down the street, boom, an immediate story, oh, he must be an athlete, he must be, right? I can't tell you how many times I've been in an elevator and people see me, what they think is me. Okay, he's decent looking, he's dressed nice, he's got a fit physique. You must be an entertainer. You must be a rapper. You must be an athlete. Did you play ball? Nobody ever gets to, maybe you went to medical school and maybe you're a psychiatrist, right? People have a single story. And so only by sharing the rest of our story, right? The strong parts and the weak parts and the vulnerable parts and the sticky little bits, do we help them color in the picture for the rest of us. And it gives them something more than just the single story. Because when people only think one thing about you, it makes it extremely easy for them to write you off and treat you in a certain type of way, if that makes sense.
You're on mute.
You're muted, George.
You're on mute.
Right? I'm trying to. Yes, here we are. We are having a conversation about Black men, Black masculinity, Black mental health, Black men in conversation. And anybody is welcome to this conversation. If you have a question, comment about what you're hearing, what would you want us to talk about right now, since we've got all of these brothers who are clinicians in the work, helping not only Black men heal, but helping all of their clients heal. And, you know, as I think about it, I want to get this question in before I get to another question in the chat. And that has to do with this idea of our notions of what it means to be a man, Black masculinity, and how that either gets in the way of our, or whether that is a reason why we should seek help. Healthy masculinity, Black masculinity, how does that stop us or prevent us from getting help? And I want y'all to keep it real, because again, y'all are making me think that, oh yeah, brother's just gonna get on the phone and call each one of y'all, and y'all know that's not true, so stop. Let's be real with this. How do we get out of that notion that to seek help is to be weak or perceived as such? So I'm gonna sit back, y'all turn on your mic and just get in there.
Yeah, I'm gonna jump in on that one real quick just to start. And I'm a huge person on like the fundamentals of things, right? Like bringing everything back to basics, back to the start. And anybody can jump in right after me as well. And that's why I always say, like, even for each one of us and for all these people on the call, just think about who you are as an instrument to those around you, right? As you said, not everybody's going to pick up the phone and call a therapist or talk to this person and try and talk to that person. What they're going to do first is try to reach out to their one very close friend, somebody they were kind of close with, or this or that, and you might be that person. And I truly stress for us as individuals to just really kind of tune our ear to recognize when somebody may be asking for help, but they may not ask you directly. You got to sometimes read in between the lines, but you have to slow down to truly listen to what people are trying to say or what their experience might be. And I understand that at times that we can't always do that. However, it's definitely a better thing for you to do, is to really just try and tune into that. And if you can't do it at that time, maybe point them in the right direction, which kind of goes, there was a question in the chat about that too, about like what other resources are available to Black men when you're in an environment where it's too risky to be vulnerable. And it really just, people tend to kind of reach out to those who are directly close to them. So, you know, I just stress that people really just attune their ear a little bit more so that they can actually react correctly, instead of deterring somebody to react adversely in a situation because they didn't get the help that they felt that they reached out for, even though it may not have been the way that we were expecting them to ask for it.
Are you getting more calls now because of the George Floyd situation? Has your phone been ringing or not?
100%. And it's more so, what's funny is that, and I'm sure a lot of y'all have the same exact the same experience with it that our clinicians in the field. Like it's actually less Black males or those actually reaching out, and it's more of other races trying to figure out what they can do, at least in my experience, or trying to let me know like, oh, I'm so sorry that, you know, you have to go through this. But, you know, as we said, like, you know, it's just, we live it, you know, we've all suppressed the things that we have to face to become who we are today and to get to this particular point. So it's not a different day. It's the same regular day. We're still facing the same things, but it's just really in our face. So, you know, I have a lot of different types of people reaching out, but, you know, to your other point, it is, for me, in my experience, it has been less Black men, but more of other races really reaching out to figure out what they can do to try and support us, at least in my experience.
I have a question to the panelists who are therapists. And I've often wondered this. I'm a criminal defense attorney, and more often than not, I'm representing who look like me. And I have always felt very young in my practice that any interaction with law enforcement brings about a certain trauma that's then attached to a conditioning that we have that basically sort of solidifies and cements the idea of a system. This system certainly exists, and I am victimized as much as all of us on this call are. I just wonder, in terms of the therapeutic approach, do we start this out with our Black men, our brothers, and dealing with what ultimately really is a trauma, and then treating the trauma before we can begin to even speak soberly about how to engage or to change the approach, or to redirect, or to confront? I guess I'll just start there. Is there an effort to first treat this as what I believe it is, as an non-professional therapist, I'll admit, but it seems to me that it's a trauma. And I'm wondering what the panelists think of that.
Right, and then you also had a question that related to implicit bias.
I did, while the other brother was talking.
That came up too. So they can have those implicit bias, okay, how that dictates the interaction.
Very good.
Exchange.
Okay, go ahead. I'll read the question. The brother was talking about how he presents to others, and frankly, how he was intuitive enough to consider how they perceived him. And what's at the base of that is a implicit bias that we all suffer with to some extent. And I'm finding that implicit bias, my question was actually, implicit bias overwhelmingly dictates our interactions and our exchange. How do we confront that with immediacy and resolve?
Great. Who wants
Okay, so I do have a thought on this, George. And maybe this answer or response is somewhat in between.
Thank you.
I like to look at things through what I call like 4 points of perspective. I always want to look at the individual. I want to look at the family. I want to look at the community, and I can extend that all the way out to the nation. And those 4 points of perspective, I always want to keep that in the systems vein. So here's what I mean. This is a challenging conversation because there is such a need in so many of the environments we find ourselves in. Here's what I mean. So if we find ourselves offering counseling to a young African-American male, and we get him for 45 to 50 minutes in that session, then he goes back into that community, perhaps where there's a lot of dysfunction, or we're not seeing the school system that he may or may not be a part of, and all these other systems. So I'm looking to say, I need to find out what this young man's community looks like. I need to find some supports within that community. I need to find out what supports look like in his family group. I need to look, is it a church group? Is it mentoring? What more do I need to do? I think one of the other brothers mentioned we need to create more spaces where African-American men can feel of use. I'm in the process of building a space where men can get together once a month, physically, not just in a Zoom session, but face-to-face, and have open conversations and open to the community. So this is a continuum, but that 4 points of perspective means, how can I create a link, one up, and one down from where I find that young man to be?
What's the guy's name?
And how do I create some of those connections, or how am I a part of creating some of that in the community? If none of those exist, then it's now my responsibility to extend beyond Zoom and beyond my practice and directly into the community.
Thank you, Duane. Again, if you are on this call, please mute yourself now. And I wish I could find the mute all thing here, because I would do it, but I can't find it. But that's okay. I hope that answers your question, and we'll continue on in the chat unless, Brandon, do you want to get in there?
Yeah, I wanted to address this part about the trauma, specifically because I work with community trauma as my expertise. I actually created a university community collaboration here in Syracuse, New York, where we provide therapeutic services specifically in the most traumatized communities in the city. And I do look at all of this as a form of trauma, right? So
yeah,
you're in these sorts of communities and there's so much violence, right? With violence comes over policing, and with over policing comes even more violence, but from the police, which is a form of trauma itself. But even the idea of feeling as if when I walk outside, I could possibly lose my life today, whether that's from the violence within my community or the violence coming from the police. Walking to the store, I have to look over my shoulders because I don't know who's coming for me, right? Someone might just like what I have on, or feel like, you know what I mean, they want to stick me up today. And I think pointing out that these type of things aren't normal and that these situations are traumatizing is key, because these things become so ingrained in us that we start to normalize it. We start to normalize looking at each other as if like, all right, is this person gonna, you know what I mean, try to do something to me this time? Or is going to the liquor store gonna, you know, will I get into some sort of confrontations? We have to normalize the idea that that's not okay. That's not normal life outside of our communities, right? And that these are traumatized situations. And people can say, all right, yeah, you know what I mean? I feel that. Now, how do I overcome these sorts of feelings? How do I detach from these narratives and create my own? And I think that's where it starts, right? First, acknowledging that what's happening within these environments are not normal, right? That these are traumatizing situations. And then how do we create our own narrative, and how do we create change in those environments to move forward?
Let me just follow up with that, you, Dr. Ish, because, and whoever else wants to get on this, because it's about your thoughts regarding the use of cognitive behavioral therapy and adverse childhood experiences to address the trauma Black men live with, by, and growing up in America. So that's sort of a piggyback, and anyone else can jump in on that. I want to get over to you on that one.
Yeah, so it's, the trauma is real, right? It's and it's a shared trauma. And a lot of us are getting more comfortable with that idea. You know, I was talking to my business partner the other day, Brian, and somebody was, he had heard something on TV that had triggered him, and I had heard something that had triggered me. Somebody was on TV talking about getting pulled over and the officer accusing them of stealing the car they were driving. And I was like, oh my God, that happened to me right after I graduated medical school. I just bought a new car and I'm pulling out of the doctor's lot. I had my white coat on the seat next to me and I got pulled over, and the guy had his hand on the top of his gun wanting to know whose car I just stole, right? And this was something I hadn't thought about in 20 years, but it's there. It's encoded. It's in your brain. And the way your brain works is our brains are wired to do two things and two things only: protect you from pain and move you towards some pleasure, period. Those are the only two reasons we do anything in this life. So from a genetic standpoint, it is more important to avoid the painful stimulus, right? Because the painful thing could kill you, right? There could be a tiger outside when you go look for food. There could be a pit that you're gonna fall in and not jump out of. And so we're extra wired to avoid the pain, right? 10 times as strong. And so for us as Black men, think of how many traumas we've had in our life, in our fathers' lives, in their fathers' lives. Those traumas get passed down to us through stories. Those traumas get passed down through learned behaviors, avoidant behaviors. Those traumas get passed down to us on a cellular level. How many Black people you know with high blood pressure? How many Black people you know with high cortisol and stress levels, and so it's affecting their bodies in different ways? How many Black people you know with high blood sugar, right? We are always on a state of alert, right? We're always flight, fight, or maybe we're going to freeze because those traumas have been passed down. They have been passed down to us, genetically encoded into us, and so we're born predisposed to it. We don't even know why we're stressed. You know what I mean? How many times have you really had a hard conversation with one of your best friends and they were like, you know what? I'm stressed, but I can't even tell you why, right? There's this thing, there's something that's just hanging over us that we feel is there, and that's what it is. It's shared trauma. So the thing that's different now, right? When we all watch those 8 minutes and 46 seconds of the life of this man being snuffed out, we all felt, oh my God, I could be next, right? And that's what's we have a renewed sense of shared traumas. We saw it, we felt it, we all got scared at the same time. Our hearts all broke at the same time. And so that's why you're seeing so many voices screaming about this change at the same time. So we've got to understand that. So what can we do? I like the brother who said, listen, I'm creating those spaces. I want to have a space where Black men can get together face to face, right? Because we do things differently. We're physical, right? The Zoom helps. But Black people, we're physical people. We like to touch each other. We like to pat each other on the back. We like proximity. That's our culture, right? So something like that will be extremely, extraordinarily helpful when we can safely do it.
I was gonna, proximity also depends on who it is, but that's a whole other thing. Quentin, you had a question. Lawrence, I want you to take this. Quentin, go ahead, unmute yourself and ask your question. Maybe you didn't hear me. All right, so here's the question. Can you speak to unhealthy forms of masculinity as a response to systemic racism and its impact on relationships and families under COVID-19?
Thanks, George.
All right. So I want to first talk about masculinity within itself. I think we do not recognize that as a construct that is based on our societal norms. Masculinity is something that we created, and the assumptions and expectations and the things associated with masculinity is based on our Western society. Masculinity looks different in different areas because it is based on the society around it. When I think about hypermasculinity or toxic masculinity that happens within our culture, I think about the conditioning that takes place. So how do we learn these things, but also the intergenerational process that takes place. Dr. Ish talked about it, right? We talked about this is something that's been happening for centuries, for multiple generations. So in the exact same way, there's a video that has been going around of a kid playing basketball in Chicago, I think. And a cop car comes by and a kid hides behind the car. Yeah. And the dad was watching it, right? And he was just like, I was so surprised that my kid did that. I never talked about anything. I never experienced that. But it's something that is happening from generation to generation, right? I think we have to recognize that these are some of our learned responses. These are some of the impacts and the effects of some of the things that we experience within our lives. And so in some ways, we think about this hypermasculinity response is because that we created from birth that response for Black men. Example, you have a 2-year-old, 3-year-old that falls on the playground. He's crying. He comes to you, lets you know he's crying. You're going to be like, okay, go ahead. I'm going to let you feel your whole, get your emotional regulation, get your cry in, do what you need to do. No, we're going to be like, all right, go play. The less you feel, the more you play, the less you feel, right? We're conditioning, we're reinforcing some of these negative ideologies that masculinity means we got to be tough. We got to be hard. In a lot of ways, that's our response to the stressors that we experience, that we had to be tougher, and we had to create this persona, this protective barrier, so that people can't we can't allow people to see the vulnerabilities that we experience on a day-to-day basis. And so some of that is a response to just kind of how we are perceived in our society. That, oh, you think we're going to be like this? Oh, okay, we're going to be like this, right? And that's a low response because of the perception that's also surrounding us. And so when I think about hypermasculinity, whether it be that we got to be tough or we got to be more promiscuous, or we do these other type of things, these are because these are characteristics been associated with that, but it's also protect us from the many traumas and many risk factors that are present within our lives, within our environments, within our societies, within our families, right? It's systemic. It's multiple layers of this that we experience all at once. One
So is
person
that
talked about it as me.
Is it exacerbated because we're in COVID now?
I think that could be another layer to it, right? Because we're not able to do things in our normal way and shape and form, right? We had to adapt in a different way. And sometimes when we adapt to new life transitions, because I believe COVID is a life transition, we have healthy and unhealthy ways to adapting. Sometimes we have not so healthier ways, but that's the way we survive, right? And so I believe COVID within itself is a new life transition. And anytime you do something that's different outside of your norm, outside of your day-to-day life, you're gonna have to adjust to it. And the way that you adjust is through your resources, the way you cope with things. And so I definitely think that could be part of it as well.
Okay, and thank you for all your help on this. We got lots of questions. Here's a question from Casey. Employers, corporations, worker centers, and unions are looking to open up dialogue and discussions about anti-Black racism, structural inequalities, white supremacy. What would your advice be to them? What would be examples of safety, example triggers that's currently being discussed? And let me just keep going here because I can't get this thing to move for me. Discuss and accountable systems to put in place safety nets, protections, and against workplace consequences for speaking out. So you see something, you say something, but then there's a consequence because you spoke out, right? You know, like, so who wants to take that? Duane.
Quick comment on that. Within a number of companies, not all, there is something called employee ERGs, or employee resource groups, or otherwise known as affinity groups.
Mm-hmm.
So these ERGs or affinity groups can be smaller groups, quote unquote minorities, people of color, marginalized populations, where they can inform their employer of choice about the climate and the culture that they're in, and have a feedback loop that might go back towards encouraging policy changes. I know I was with one organization where they sent out a survey, and then at the bottom they asked for demographics. I'm the only African-American male there, so as soon as I bubble in my demographics, I've told the whole company who just said that particular thing.
Right.
So I had to say, I don't feel comfortable filling this out because everyone else kind of disappears into anonymity, but I don't, the way it was written. So if an employee resource group or an affinity group existed, that is something that could go from the ERG or the affinity group back to the company. If you really want to do a climate survey, then maybe you have to take the demographics off and make sure there's no adverse impact to what's coming back, so people don't have pushback for what they're saying. So I encourage people to develop an affinity group or look up an ERG or an employee resource group, and that might be a way of creating anti-racist policies in terms of a think tank within an organization.
And don't they need to have some sort of power or leverage in the organization as well to actually be effective? Or
so maybe there's some dotted line relationships or solid line relationships between CEOs and presidents and these ERGs of sorts. So they know that this information is going directly to these folks that have governance over this. So there are different ways to do that. You know, maybe attorneys are a bit more involved in some of that process, but at least human resources should be able to support that initially, perhaps through employee relations or even organizational development, creating those portals of communication.
Anything, anybody want to say any more about that? If not, go ahead, Brandon.
Can I ask that just really quick, and I'll make it quick. I think that the same way we're talking about making space for Black men to have these comfortable conversations, I think the top administrators have to make that space for individuals within organizations to have those conversations, right? So we can't expect, you know, frontline employees to step up and go approach, you know what I mean, the superiors. The superiors have to work from this bottom-up approach where they have to say, look, we're asking you to come to us and let us know what we can do. And I must boldly add, open up the platform, sit back and listen. Just listen. You know what I mean? This is equaling out that power imbalance. So you're giving power to the individuals who might have marginalized and oppressed voices to finally allow for their voices to be heard. Take that feedback and try to make change within an organization.
Yeah, I love that, right? You gotta have that you know, what Duane just said about doing it systematically, right? You've got to do it on that level. Systemic racism was instituted systemically. So you've got to deconstruct it systematically, right? And so I think just like as we're looking at, you know, whenever we start shooting back in LA, every set is going to have a COVID compliance officer on that set, right? And this person is responsible for making sure everybody is following the guidelines. I think, well, you know, what brother just said, I think we're going to have to put the pressure on employers to have a cultural competency officer in-house, right? Where if I am the only brother there, every time I say something, somebody knows exactly who it is. I want to know how, I want to be able to go there and voice my opinions anonymously. What do we all want? We want to be seen, we want to be heard, we want to be understood. You just create the platform, right? You don't even have to be tasked with understanding how to dismantle it within your group. Just create the platform for people to be seen and heard and understood and get it off their chest, and you will notice a dramatic difference in how people feel in that workspace.
Brothers, we have so many questions and so little time, so I'm going to try my best to get through as many, but we'll have to see. Here's a question from Nisha. She says this: how would you suggest helping someone with their triggers, PTSD of these situations? Because typically telling someone to go speak with a therapist is not met well, no matter who you are telling. So if you know someone needs to speak to someone other than just a friend, how would you suggest saying something? Let me combine that with a Facebook question that has multi-generational trauma has deeply affected our communities. How can we begin to deal with this in a culturally competent way in order to heal Black and brown people? So I try to put those two together. Who wants to take that?
I think if you've got a friend and this friend is stressed, this friend is in some type of emotional distress, right? And you can see that, or maybe they brought it to your attention. Hey, this is the thing I'm having. I think, you know, when we're talking about creating that space to be vulnerable, this is a perfect opportunity for brothers and sisters, right? It's like, hey, here's what I can do, right? I can give you a hug right now. I'll give you some words of support right now. I wish I could help you work through it more, but I know I don't know how to do that, because a lot of times in a lot of situations, I can barely do that for myself. I wonder if talking to somebody else would help, right? You can say that, and that alone, you just made it okay. You know what I mean? I see you're in pain. I see you're struggling. Here's what I can offer you, and I know that's only going to get you part of the way home. I wonder how much better you'd feel if you could talk to somebody who could really give you the tools to move forward, right? We don't have to have all the answers. We just got to make it okay for each other to seek those answers out.
That's a great point. I would 100% agree with the handling. Right. And also, as a marriage and family therapist, that's something that we actually talk about a lot in our coursework, and how to really level with people and kind of make them feel you enough to take that next step. And one thing I will say again for all of us on this call is, I mean, you guys right now is to kind of educate yourself in the sense of knowing kind of what's out there and what's available, right? Not everybody is like us. Not everybody is going to take the initiative to be on these calls. Not everybody may have the ability or the accessibility to join in on something like this based off of providing for their family or their environment and things of that sort, right? So us being reachable to all of the different people around us on a regular day basis by educating our own personal selves on the resources that are available, building our network, communicating with each other regularly. Like, you know, if I talk to someone and I notice they're struggling with somebody and struggling with something, or let's say they randomly have a conversation, I'm on vacation in Vegas, for instance, right? You know, I might be able to then bring them around somebody like Lawrence, or let them know that, you know, I have some people around there, even without necessarily saying it to them directly, but entertain that conversation a little bit, kind of throw a little alley-oop there to where they might run into somebody that they might vibe with a little bit, and then that conversation kind of happens. So I think a lot of it is, at least in my opinion and the way that I see it, is to strategically put people in places for things to just kind of happen organically, at least, you know. And I think through us educating ourselves and understanding what's available to us out there, that we'll be better able to kind of put those people in those positions so that they can receive the help that they need.
George,
And can you also combine that with the generational trauma and how to deal with that in a culturally competent way as well?
Yeah. For me,
you could have done that too. I just wanted to get that answer.
You want to jump in? Go right ahead, Duane.
Okay, I was thinking about.
Duane, before you answer that, so
yes,
I've got a request, and I don't know who can do it, but I've got a request to extend the time somewhat. So, I need agreement on that. Just looking here. So,
I know I have an 8 o'clock, so I got another client to see. So a few of us might have to tap out.
Right.
Sure.
If we'll stay as long as we can, and if you can't, then we'll do that. Right. So, great. Okay. Good.
So just one thing, and let my brothers jump in here. Within fraternal spaces, I know there are things where I can say on the shield. I can say on the square. I can say on the faithful breast. I can be able to share anything with that brother because I know that it's said on the shield and it goes nowhere else.
Right.
I think men have developed that within their own way. Even if you're not a part of an official fraternity of sorts, you've developed some of those things like, Brett, let me tell you, when you say it like that, you know that it's said in confidence with that other man.
Right.
So I would encourage the people listening to this to tap into some of that space of on a shield. That means I should be able to have a space of vulnerability with you to share at the deepest levels. And I believe that you're going to give me some wise counsel coming back to me full circle.
They might want to use another way of doing that. On the shield has some other
implications.
Yes.
We're always looking for the positive feedback, positive feedback loop. I need to hear from you. I need to hear from you, bro.
I got a question. This is about the responses that you're giving. Is this generational, or do men have the same solution for the anxiety and trauma that they're experiencing? In other words, is it the same answer whether you're 20-something or 60-something? Well, how do you deal with the different generational responses to being okay and trauma? And I'm going to combine that with Facebook, which says, again, talking to someone could be considered a sign of weakness. So if you are young or even older and you are used to wearing the mask, circling back to that, is it a generational thing, and how do we deal with that?
Yeah, Lauren, you can jump in on that first, and I'll go right after. All right, I'll just hit this one real fast, just because of the different age groups as well. And it goes back to Mr. Phillips' question that he had asked about like addressing trauma and things of that sort. And I actually literally just completed a study that was funded by the Quell Foundation, where we got a group of incarcerated youths. So they were from ages 11 to 18, and we brought them out to participate in an experiential form of therapy called equine facilitated therapy, where we utilize horses, right? So pretty much in a nutshell, what we had found, especially on the topic of traumas, and it goes back to exactly what Dr. Ish was talking about as well. Typically, all of our traumas, people, especially kids, they don't recognize that they are traumas, right? So as they progressed in the study, what we found was just that these kids came out to the barn, and we have these experiential activities where they do activities with the horse and they have particular conversations with therapists. And through these conversations that they have in talking about their lives or us relating things to the environment around them and their home environment, that's when the conversation kind of started to get to a point where they'll talk about their particular experiences, and they'll recognize that those are traumas that caused them to be in the position that they were in today at that point. So that's why they were incarcerated for things of like, drugs, theft, robbery, this, that. And a lot of that stemmed back to familial issues, single parent households, all of the things that many of us as minorities will face overall, right? But moving through that as well, as somebody who also works with athletes and people who are much older as well, one of the correlations that I did see personally, as from the findings of the study that showed that, again, through that therapeutic conversation or having somebody to just at least talk to, they were able to uncover some of those traumas. It's the same thing as people who get to a certain point in life. And just as Dr. Ish was talking about, okay, you're a ball player, you're an athlete, you're a rapper, you're a singer. You strike a large amount of money or something that is going to force you to skip addressing these traumas that you never realized that you had. So you start to mask them with other things and your environment and things of that sort. But eventually all of that stuff comes back full circle and impacts you. So what I will say to that question is it truly does not matter across your age bracket. It's just that, at least clinically, in my perspective, I think it's almost worse when you wait for it to recognize that at a much older age. You got so much more things that you kind of have to undo at that point. Whereas if you catch it a lot sooner in a child or somebody who is young of age, you know, before they hit 18, 20 years old, and you can kind of work through those things there and address those traumas, what you're then doing is you're giving those individuals the ability to learn the personal tools and resources that they need to identify that they have experienced a trauma or have been going through something that they need to start to work through or seek help or seek a confidant or somebody to speak to as well to kind of work through those issues. So yes to that initial question from back then where you had asked, you know, is it addressing those traumas first? And yes, it truly is, but it's really about finding an effective way to recognize that you've even experienced one in the first place. Because as we talked about, when you break it down genetically and over time and how we're configured, what we're going to do is just find a way to suppress that pain or suppress that emotion that is going to stop us from feeling the drive that we need to push forward. And sadly, down the line, that just comes back to bite us in the ass, for lack of a better term.
For lack of a better, well, so here's what I'm going to ask. So it is 8 o'clock, and I did promise 1 hour. So if some of you can continue, we appreciate that. But I also will invite the panelists to even answer some of the questions within the chat, like by chatting them out, and then we'll print the, we'll get the transcript and give some of those answers, because there's more questions coming in than the time we have. But I'll try to get to all of them, and also Facebook as well. So that's a time check. Are we good? And audience, we good? Thumbs up, everybody? Okay.
Yeah, I'm good.
All right. We'll just try to get through as much as we can. Here's the next question. Well, here's a comment. Masculinity is a natural energy that can be observed in every aspect. I think we have to study it more in its essence in order to know what's healthy and how to amend it. Thank you to Dr. Duane McClure. We appreciate you, brother. And
sir.
Thank you, Mark.
Yeah, and say it again.
I look forward to staying in contact with all you brothers here. Thank you so much. I feel like I'm learning from each one of you. My client just showed up. I'm jumping off.
Do what you got to do.
And
I love it. He's doing the work. He's doing the work.
Peace,
Here's another question. Stigma and discrimination can worsen someone's mental health problems and delay or impede their getting help and treatment and their recovery. As Black clinicians, what steps have you taken to address these and other barriers to treatment? That combined with, again, how do you tell someone that they need to talk to someone? So put all of that together. Who wants, Dr. Ish, Lawrence, Brandon, who wants to?
Yeah. I think we need to recognize that our words have power. We give significance to certain words. So when we talk about mental health in a negative light, we're getting significance to that.
Mm-hmm.
I tell my clients all the time, therapy is a resource. It's kind of like tutoring. So if you go to tutoring because they're failing and want to pass, C want to make a B, D want to make an A, and want to continue to be an A or continue to have an A or be a tutor one day. And so in some ways, you have to recognize that therapy is a resource at any stage in your life it can be effective and beneficial. Whether you really, really need it, whether it's just something you do because you got time, you got money for, whatever it may be, it can be beneficial and effective if you utilize it. It is a resource. And what we have to do is create more access to that resource as a society, as a community. I think one of the ways we could do that to hopefully destigmatize some of the negative beliefs related to mental health is visibility. Looking at all the Black brothers here that are clinicians, right? And so we now they can be like, okay, I can talk to you. You know what I'm saying? You got tattoos, you like the music I listen to, you got shades, you can talk like me, you know what I'm saying? We can vibe together. You understand that when I say something, you understand it. I don't have to explain myself further, right? That's important. That's important for us because that allows us to normalize mental health. I think of therapy, it's a conversation. When I work with my clients, it's a conversation. We're talking. I have resources. You have your own experience. We're going to utilize and collaborate those together, and we're going to work. But we're just talking, right? It's talking. We're communicating, right? And so I think it's important to just to kind of destigmatize and be like, hey, you're just having a conversation. You're having a conversation with somebody that has expertise, has certain knowledge, and at the end of the day, you're going to get as much out of therapy as you put in, right? I also don't want people to believe that going to therapy, if you just go through the motions, if you just there, show up, don't want to share what's really going on, don't really want to work through these things outside the therapy room, you're really not going to improve. It's a collaborative experience that.
But I got to get to you, right? I mean,
yeah.
Barrier, I got to get to you to know that,
absolutely,
right? And that's I still think that is the barrier, again, with all of the things that's being said here, to get me to pick up that phone and say, I need to talk to somebody. Because we know that the adverse impact of not talking to somebody shows up in other behaviors because we're not dealing with that unaddressed trauma. Going back to some of the things that other people have said around how do you heal from that if you're not even willing to come to the conversation.
Yeah,
I think. Go ahead, Brandon.
No, I was just going to piggyback off of what you were saying. I think that one thing that we failed to mention so far is that a lot of these things are learned experiences, right? We've somehow along the way, we've learned that it's not okay to be anything but masculine, right? Like, it's not okay to go to therapy. Like, I invite people to think about, like, you know, why do you think certain gender roles exist? You know, like, where did you learn that it was okay that it was appropriate for men to do all the work and women to do the cleaning, or vice versa? Whatever you know, how do you know what you know? Where did those understandings come from? And so when we relate that back to masculinity, we've learned along the way that it's not okay to share that we're sad. It's not okay to share that, you know, right now I just really need to vent and I need you to listen and empathize and just hold me. You know what I mean? You know, I think all the women would agree that a lot of men just want to be held sometimes. They can't say that, but they learn over time that we need that sometimes. But we've learned that that's not okay. Same thing when it comes to mental health. And I think that it's remiss not to mention how larger structures of power has contributed to this when you think about
what do you mean by larger structures of power? Do you mean institutional racism?
So institutions, right? When you think about the whole idea of why, in my opinion at least, why Black people don't go to therapy, one is because think about what happens when women go into the hospital and they complain about the symptoms that they're having, right? It's largely unignored, and then you see there's no surprise that Black women have higher rates of babies with low birth rate, right? Because they are not being acknowledged, they aren't being listened to when they go in. So the larger structures have failed them, right? When you think about the whole reason that we have the IRB process is because the syphilis experience exploited Black people, you know? So like, of course we aren't gonna wanna go to therapy when a health field has traditionally exploited us, right? But when it comes to people actually seeking the services, I think in a Black community, we tend to go with our leaders, right? What's the pastor saying? You know, what's George has some clout, what's he saying in the community? You know, what are the celebrities saying? And so I think that conversation needs to be had, right? So I know for me and George, you know this, I've created that space to where one person has entered to the door. So now they can go say, you know, I went to this therapy and I gotta say, you know, I got a lot of things off my chest that I didn't know really was gonna help the way that it did like that. You know, I think you should go check that out because that really worked for me. And so now we've created this conversation that, all right, this therapy stuff is all right. Let me go see what this is about.
And we should say that in your particular case, you know, the other brothers are, you know, high powered, you know, they got billables, but you're offering free mental health services in Syracuse at the Syracuse Community Connections.
Beautiful thing.
So anybody who wants to talk to somebody and they want to talk to someone who they think that they can relate to in Syracuse, New York, they have you right now. So we're happy about that.
Yeah.
Doctor,
George,
say something.
George,
yeah.
let me piggyback on something what the brothers were saying, man. when we were talking about, he was talking about resources, right? And viewing therapy as a resource. And it made me think, yeah, because typically for us, Black folks, our resources are typically very limited, right? And so we have had, any one of us knows how our mom prioritized what had to come first and second and third in our house, right? So because we had limited resources. First it was rent and mortgage. We got to keep the roof on. Then we got to keep some food in the pot. Then we got to keep the lights on. Now we need clothes to get to school. And so those self-care things kind of drop down towards the latter part of the list, right? We've been taught as a culture about delayed gratification. Well, you may not have it now, but if you work hard, if you keep your head down, if you go to school and do all the right things, you get it later, right? We've been taught how to grin and bear it from our ancestors. Yeah, life is hard. It's just something you got to get through, and maybe one day it'll get better. You try to get through it. We've been taught how to stick it out for as long as we can, and it'll be okay. I do some of the same things now. If I wake up and my knee is hurting me because I'm getting older, okay, I'll try to get through the week as best I can. But then the next week, maybe I got a limp. Okay, now it's getting noticeable. And now the next week, wow, I can barely swing it over the bed. Now I got to do something. We wait until it is an absolute emergency before we remind ourselves that it's okay to get something done, right? It's okay to take care of yourself. It's okay to feel good. It doesn't, we hadn't talked about this, but, it doesn't make you any more Black or any more part of the struggle to not do well, right? You can still be Black and you can still be a part of the struggle, and you can take care of yourself. And now you can use that as an example, right? And so I think a big part of it is, it's the trust, right? I want somebody who looks like me, who talks like me, who sounds like me, who I don't have to explain myself to. Again, I want to be seen, heard, and understood. I want to walk through that door, and as soon as you see me, you're like, I know who you are. I got a best friend just like you, right? I don't want to be heard. I want to be understood. And then trust is a big part of that. But I think the larger part of that is just knowing that we are worth being taken care of, right?
So,
Yeah.
You want to say something? Who was?
Yeah, so that was Tyrone.
Okay.
I just want to add one really small tidbit onto that as well. And it's also for individuals to also recognize, and this is big. I mean, for Black males, anybody looking to seek to get advice from anybody, also take time to recognize when you're getting bad advice. Whether you turn to a friend, like there's certain people.
Yeah.
You think you're turning to somebody and you're confiding in them, like, yo, I'm going through X. Oh yeah, you should just do this. And it's like, what? That don't sound. But then that's an additional option in your head now. Like, oh, maybe if it worked for him or this or that. So also having enough self-agency and resilience to recognize also when to walk away from particular people or environments that are really not serving the place that you're trying to elevate to for yourself. And that is a huge piece of that as well.
Very important.
Let me ask this question, I guess, as we get to our close here. People want to know, how do we heal? So what are brothers saying to you when they finally come in to see you? What are you hearing, brother? What's on our minds right now? And what are we looking to heal from?
I think one thing that's often said in my experience as a clinician is, I came to you for this exact reason. Because you look back at me, I feel like at the bare minimum, you can understand my experience, you can understand stuff that's going on, we can talk the same language, you can understand, different lingo. I feel like this is somebody I can relate to. And so when I work with, sometimes I work with kids, and I remember there was a time in my life when I worked at a summer arts athletic camp back in Texas, where I'm from. And one of the counselors said something that was very, very, just something that stuck with me over the years. And it was like, if you want a kid to respect you, they need to see you through them. They be able to relate to you, right? And so naturally, with that relatability that's present, you have a place where you feel like I can have some conversations. Dr. Ish talked about trust. Dr. Todd talked about trust and the importance of that. And so some of that is just like, man, I came to you because I feel like I can relate to you, right? And I try to utilize that. I'm really into narrative therapy and utilizing language as a way of understanding how we view the world. I view myself as a social constructionist. So what I mean by that is I view the way we view our world, right? I think the way we communicate how we view our world further validates and reinforces our experience, right? And so if I say that my life is terrible, I believe that, right? I'm using my words to communicate to you how I'm feeling. And so in the exact same way, I like to utilize our language and our words to reframe some of our perceptions, reframe some of our realities. And so sometimes it's we may be experiencing something very much at the same time, right? But we have different perceptions, we have different views. And because we have different perceptions, different views, we communicate things differently. And so I like to introduce different language in hopes that can hopefully reshape, reframe, and reinforce a different perception or a different view of their reality.
Thank you for that. Let me ask you, Ish, does the medical community classify racists as mentally ill?
That's a great question. You know, there was some debate before this last updated version of the DSM-5, which is what we use to figure out who's got what, came out. And there's been some debate about it for the last 20 years. No, it does not. It's not in there, right? Should it be? That's debatable, right? And it's to a certain extent, whether you're white, black, yellow, brown, we're all racist, right? If you were born in this country, you have racist ideology. Not saying that is a conscious thing, right? I'm not saying that you hate. I'm not saying that you are consciously anti-black, anti-yellow, anti-brown, anti-whatever. But the way the culture is set up, you can't get exposed to the culture without also getting exposed to some of the ideology, right? You're standing in line at the grocery store. When's the last time you seen one of us on one of the magazine covers, right? When is the last time you've seen one of us in a big blockbuster movie who was more than one thing, right? If you see one of us of color, we're usually one thing. We're the angry black guy. We're the hood black guy. We're the angry black woman, right? It's only one story that they're telling about us. And so you can't have grown up here and not have some of that seep in, right? It's just what it is. And so I think in just acknowledging that and being okay with the idea of, yeah, you know what, there are some automatic beliefs and assumptions that I have that are probably off base just because of this crazy place that we grew up in, and we got to acknowledge that and then move forward. You know, is it a mental illness? Yeah, it's a sickness because it helps us all not do well, right? And it limits, not only does it limit my life because of what you think of me, it limits the enjoyment you can have in your own life, right? And so, that's the takeaway. But no, is it technically classified at? Oh, absolutely not. Is it one where, yeah, we're seeing more and more where that mentality is really making us all sick. And honestly, we're all sick of it.
I guess, and I appreciate that, Dr. Ish. Let me ask you all to do this. So right now we're in a moment in history, right, where people are discovering that there's been equity and inequality, or white people are now discovering, wow, things have not been good for y'all in this country, right? It's a discovery. And so corporations are giving money, people are reading books, there's a big awareness now, which is a good thing. So given that there's a new awareness, what do companies do? What do individuals, what do black men do? How do we support each other? How do we use this time in history where there's awakening, right? Even though there's still things going on that are wrong, we still have people getting chokeholds and all this stuff. But there's historic change even in these last few weeks, even though we've known that these things have been problems for many generations. So how do we heal as brothers? How do we move forward as brothers, black men in particular? Because, and people ask me, why is this about black men? Because this is the space we created, right? So where do we go from here? Each of you give me a thought. How does this personally affect you as a black man and a clinician? And where do we go from here? What do companies do? What do individuals do? What do organizations do? What do we all do? So let me start with Brandon.
Yeah, I'll try to address this as best as I can. One, I think organizations and companies, as I mentioned earlier, just need to listen. Listen to the oppressed and the marginalized voices within your company, work from a bottom-up approach and try to make change that way. This can't happen as a top-down process, especially because most companies at the top doesn't reflect the Black men. Let's put it bluntly. And I think that this is time for companies to reevaluate, their policies and procedures, reevaluate, well, what are the demographics of my company, and why do my demographics look this way, and what can we do to change this? I will say that as I've been out, I've seen a lot of organizations taking a stance. So I'm somewhat hopeful of that. I do want to address the healing part, because I think that's important. One thing that I've personally been doing, and I encourage my clients to do as well when they come in, is read. You know what I mean? If you're feeling angry, how do you channel that anger? So maybe that looks like being on the front line of protest and channeling your anger that way. Maybe that looks like joining other groups that are looking to make a positive change and channeling what's going on for you in that way. I know that I've personally been avoiding some of those things Ish talked about in terms of what we see on a movie screen, right? Like, it's hard at these times to go watch a movie and see Black people be portrayed in that same way, that same narrative over and over. So for myself, I'm watching different things now. I'm watching Being Mary Jane, where everybody's a professional Black person, like everybody's doing well. I'm watching Dear White People, where I'm getting information from that, and these are Black people within Ivy League universities. These are Black people doing their thing. So I'm getting away from the stereotypical stuff that they usually try to portray for Black people, and I'm looking at all positives.
You're on mute.
Oh, I did that again. Oh, Tyrone. Go ahead, Tyrone.
Yeah, so to get on your question, just basically like, what do we do right now? And even to answer that first question of I'm not okay. I know previously we talked about this a little bit, and even me as a mental health clinician, I really had to take some time recently to realize that me personally, no, I was not okay. Constantly watching all the stuff in the media, I can't even open Instagram without seeing somebody getting dragged by police, or somebody getting shot or killed, or feeling like, my life could potentially be worth less than others just because of the color of my skin. That's, no matter how strong you are as a person, just getting that repeatedly thrown in your face at every second. The second you wake up in the morning is tough. So I had to change my routine up a little bit. Like, okay, I'm not going to open Instagram for a few hours, or just wait to get on with the day before I jumped into certain things. And that really did affect me as a clinician, because, people are turning to me for answers. They are turning to me for these conversations. And I do need to find it in myself every single day to still show up for what I, signed up to do as a profession, and that's just who I am at the core. So for me, what I have done thus far is, and any other clinician or anybody else that's practicing should be very aware of that, to understand their own personal emotions. And because I can't help people if I feel like I need help myself at times, so to be very open and honest with yourself about that, and to find the things that, we always talk about self-care in the field. So just find things that help you stay grounded. Me personally, I feel at ease close to the ocean. So I try and frequent anywhere where I see water, like the beach or something of that sort, if I can. And also in particular, friends and family. Like, I do have, again, like I said, 1 or 2 people in my circle that I know I can just have a quick conversation with about anything, or just talk, that it starts to kind of make me feel based again. So, to anybody else out there who, may feel like they're struggling or going through something, I would just encourage you to just kind of try and tap into whatever it is that kind of makes you feel based, like whether it's reading, engaging in exercise, particular activities. Just kind of try and turn to those things to get yourself to that place where you can mentally start to assess where you're at, and then start taking the adequate steps in the direction that you need to take. So, that's what I've been doing for myself. I'm thankful for understanding what the steps that I need to take, and having those resources available to me to get myself in a better position so I can continue to help others.
So the first thing you had to do was acknowledge that you were not okay, right?
Correct. Yeah, I wasn't good. I was like, oh my, like, yeah, I think the biggest turning point for me was like, I remember looking at something and I was just like, it's, through all the things that, I continue to accomplish, or it's like, okay, I sign up to help people. Nobody wants to help me. It's like the people who are supposed to protect me might kill me too. People of the same race as me that I try and share the things that I'm going through with might be envious and also want to kill me. Like, somebody else might want to come for me for my opportunity. So then just noticing that it's coming from so many different directions, and that never has changed. Just as we say, it's just that it's really in our face. So we're able to be reminded of the adversities and things that we constantly live through every day that are painful. However, our bodies and our minds condition ourselves to suppress these feelings and emotions and kind of have that tunnel vision on. But at times you really do need to take that step back and address those feelings and have the conversations that you need to have to reground yourself and then take that step forward. So that first step is definitely self-acknowledgement of recognizing that you need to try something different and find it quick, so.
All right, Lawrence, Dr. Lawrence Jackson, what about you? How are you personally affected, and how do we heal, and what's your advice to companies, corporations, communities? Because this is the moment now. They want to know what they do.
Absolutely. I brought in the importance of awareness, right? And I think you have to prioritize awareness at its multiple levels, right? I think we view this as complicated instead of complex. When you think about racism, you think about discrimination, how it's embedded within our society, it's complex because there's multiple layers of it. It's systemic, it's institutionalized. It's all these, it's interpersonal. And I think companies need to prioritize their ability to be aware and to be able to educate themselves and to act upon these things, right? And so you can't do this passively. You have to do this actively. You have to review your values. You have to review your company, as Brandon and Dr. Ty said as well. And so you gotta do these things that are prioritizing what has not been a priority for numerous of years. It has to be on top of your list. It can't be at the bottom. It has to be at the top of your list, right? And so I think that's extremely important. When I think about healing as a whole, what things we can do to heal, I think it's important for us to recognize in some ways that we have many layers. I often I like to reference the movie Shrek, and Shrek was talking to Eddie Murphy, who was the donkey, and he's talking about, I'm like an onion that have many layers. Mm-hmm. In the same way we do as well, right? And so we have a physical outside layer that everybody can see, but we also have an emotional layer, a mental layer, professional layer, social layer, a spiritual layer maybe, right? And so just like an onion, if we leave it in the fridge too long and we recognize there's bacteria growth on the outside, we know better than to cut into it because those other layers are not preserved. They're also bad. And so we have to make sure that we are healing by preserving our layers. And so what I try to do is identify what can I do that can benefit my mental, my emotional, my social, my spiritual, my professional layers. And so that when I am exhibiting an outside physical layer, I'm fresh, right? I'm fulfilled. And so I can pour into other people if I'm preserving my layers. And so it's important for us to be able to prioritize preserving each of those layers, doing whatever we can, whether it be our diet, whether it be our exercise, whether it be meditation, doing what we can that is highlighting as many of those layers as possible, preserve them so that we can be that much more efficient. Another thing I always bring up is when you're on an airplane, they tell you to put your mask on first before you help other people. The reason being is because if your mask is not on, you're trying to help somebody else and you pass out and their mask's not on, that's the whole role. So if you take care of yourself first, you can fulfill and you can pour into others. And so I think it's important for me, and I share with other people, to make sure that you're preserving each of your layers. I think Ty and Brandon both talked about different things that can accomplish pouring and preserving one of your layers or two of your layers, either emotionally, mentally, physically, whatever the case may be, but you have to do so in a way that is making that priority for yourself. And so making sure that that is important for you and something that you prioritize is pouring into yourself in each of those layers.
You, Dr. Lawrence Jackson, Dr. Tyrone Grandison, Brandon Hollie, and Dr. Ish, what you got for me?
Yeah, man, I'm gonna echo a lot of what the docs were saying. It's a process, right? And you got to be patient with yourself in the process. Healing is a process, and it's in stepwise fashion. So the person you are today, the person you want to be tomorrow, you can't get there from where right? You don't have the tools right now. If you already had the tools, you'd already be there. So it's a process. And for me, I break it down in a few steps. First problem is identify the problem. What is your problem? What is the thing that you're pretending not to know about yourself? You know what it is.
Wow.
You're scared to say it out loud.
Ooh.
Say, what are you angry? Are you worried about being abandoned? Right? What is that thing? Address the core wound. That's the second step. Childhood wounds are universal. Everybody's had them. We've all had them. And as Black folks, we've got generations of unhealed childhood wounds that we are still trying to process. So that's a huge thing. Was it abandonment? What is it not being enough? Is it the anger? Right? What are those things, right? So the third step is realizing that what happened to you was not specific to you. The same types of traumas happen to all of us. We all go through this stuff because as kids, we internalize it. We make it personal. If I was better enough, if I was better, if I was nicer, if I didn't get into so much trouble, maybe if I was smart, if I had all A's, maybe if I was better looking, maybe if I was prettier, maybe if I was bigger, taller, stronger, all these things that we, as kids, if I had been better, then this wouldn't have happened. So wipe that off the plate, right? And then the next step is understanding how you reacted in response to that, right? A big part of how our personalities develop is in defense to the injury.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Dad wasn't here. That felt sucky. I must not have been enough. Well, I'm going to make sure I show up and I'm going to always have more than enough. I'm going to always have money. I'm going to always have clothes. I'm going to always have women because the defense to the thing that abandoned and hurt me the most is what I'm just. So understand how your personality developed there. And then the next step is understanding what you want. What do you want, George? What do you want? I don't know about you. I just want to feel good, right? I want to feel good. The reason you want what you want in life is because of how you think it's going to make you feel. The reason I want the Benz, the reason I want the big house, the reason I want the pretty lady, the reason I want the nice clothes is because of how I think it's going to make me feel. But if you can realize that you can get the feeling first without the things, now you just cleared the path for having all those things come your way. And once you realize what you want, now you got to reprogram yourself, right? How do I do, right? First thing, step care. Brother just mentioned it. Take care of yourself. It's okay to take care of yourself. It's okay to ask for a hug. It's okay to be able to shut it down. Say, it's okay to be wrong. It's okay to say, you know what? I have no idea how to fix it, but we can figure it out together. One of the other things you can do is change your story, right? We've all got the story of who we are because we want to be understood and we want people to get us. But we start with all the trials and the tribulations. And let me tell you what happened to me. And oh yeah, well, this happened to me. And well, by the way, this thing happened to me. And before we know it, we get into a game of can you top this, right? Can I hurt more than George hurts? And nobody feels better. So you got to start to tell your story from the end. You know how it ends. I don't care what happened to you. You're here listening to us today, so it didn't kill you. It didn't break you. It didn't beat you. You are here still striving to do better. So tell that story from the end. You know what? This thing, I am so proud of who I am today because let me tell you what I got over. If you can do one little thing, it can be an amazing difference in your life. And then you got to expose yourself to stuff again, right? As where we are now, where a lot of us have been, is like, you know what? I'm not going to share who I am. I'm not going to put myself out there because I could get hurt. I'm not going to put myself out there because I could be underappreciated or not appreciated at all. But you can never do that. It's that old African proverb, right? Never hide your light under a basket. That's not what we're here to do. You're here to show up as a fully formed man, as a fully formed woman every single day, regardless of who you think may or may not appreciate it. And the way to do that is to share bits and pieces of yourself. Is it all going to be accepted? No. Is it all going to be appreciated? No. But you're developing trust in yourself to know that you don't need it to in order to be okay, right? And always be aware of your emotional guidance system, right? Your emotions tell you they're guiding you through life. Hey, I'm feeling a little nervous. What is it that's got me feeling close to the edge today? I'm feeling a little angry. What is it that's got me feeling a little bit over the top today? Always be aware of that and never not be patient and be kind to yourself, right? All of those niceties that you extend to other people, right? We're always so much more willing to do for others than we're willing to do for ourselves. Can you be patient with yourself? Can you be kind to yourself? Can you be sweet and tender and gentle to yourself? Can you give yourself a gift that makes you feel good regardless of what anybody else thinks about it, right? And so everybody's going to be somewhere different on that list, but you've got to go through that. It is a process. It is a process, and you've got to trust the process And in trusting the process, the way you do that is you trust yourself to know that A, I am worth it, and B, I am going to get there. It's simply a matter of time.
Whoa, that was a lot. Thank you so much, Doc. I have one more question I'm gonna slip in here before we go, because we are going right after this question. So y'all all tell us how to find you and how to continue this conversation. Here's the question. Do any of you use the 8 dimensions of wellness in your practice? If so, can they speak more towards its effectiveness in helping a person in their recovery? So do any of you use the 8 dimensions of wellness in your practice? And if you do, can you speak more towards their effectiveness in a person's recovery? Who uses them? Any of you?
I do not.
Unmute yourself, Lawrence.
Yeah, I personally do not as well.
I think, guys, in some way, shape, or form, right, we all incorporate it, right? We all look at the different aspects of who you are. You have this physical self, this intellectual self, this social self. Brother was talking about earlier, your emotional self. What are those layers? And so in some way, shape, or form, if you're doing it right, you're going to touch on all those 8 dimensions at some point, right? Because nobody's all just one thing. The goal is to get whole. I don't think there's a lot of folks who will systematically go through their mind as a healer, as a therapist, and say, okay, today we're going to work on your physical self. Today we're going to work on your intellectual self. You work with what walks through the door. And at some point, we're going to touch on all those aspects, I think.
Dr. Jackson.
Sorry about that. Yeah, I utilize it in a way of those layers, right? And so I want my clients to be able to identify in which ways is this helpful? And in which layer are you able to preserve by doing this particular activity, by utilizing this particular resource, utilize particular intervention, right? And so I'm really big on recognizing, because I think that's a part of emotional intelligence, is emotional regulation, is emotional identification. And so being able to identify kind of what's happening with you and how it's impacting you and how are you able to feel better, right? And so I utilize it in that way. And so if we're talking about mental layer, right? Okay, what's going on? Let's identify it. All right, what has worked before? Right? I like to utilize previous strengths, I'm an assets-based approach therapist. So when I realize that my clients have solutions that they've utilized. Some maybe not as healthy as others, but they have some type of solution. So let's see what they have. Let's see what we bring to the table. And then we can tweak it if we need to. And we can figure out how effective that has been before in the past, but also how can we make it more effective moving forward, right? And so if I want my clients to be able to consciously be able to recognize and implore this particular activity, a particular intervention to help them to preserve a layer, I want to be able to identify where it's going, where it's happening, and what it is that they're trying to navigate or trying to solve or trying to overcome.
Dr. Lawrence Jackson is the Black Male Therapist. You can @ him at the Black Male Therapist on Instagram. Dr. Tyrone Grandison, you better call Tyrone, right? Is it you better call Tyrone?
Better Call Tyrone is the @ name, @ Better Call Tyrone.
Better Call Tyrone. If y'all know what he's talking about, y'all know what that means. Better Brandon, how do we find you? And by the way, you're right here in where we're coming from, where I'm coming from, Syracuse, New York. Let me just go back. Dr. Tyrone Grandison is in Miami, Florida, and Dr. Lawrence Jackson is in Las Vegas, Nevada. All right, Brandon, Syracuse, go.
Yeah, so Instagram, the handle is Don, DON _ Lotso, LOTSO. I also, really quick, George, I wanted to take this time to thank the business professionals that came on in here, because I noticed my CEO had jumped on. Okay. And to me, that shows that he's trying to listen and understand, okay, what's going on here and how can we make change within this organization.
Shout out to him. Yeah, I saw that. Congrats on that. Shout out, right? Because you gotta get the information. And he was on for a pretty good long time. How do people take advantage of your free therapy services?
Yeah, so if you all are familiar with, most people know it as the Southwest Community Center. So if you call there, you just tell them that you're looking to get therapy. They'll know exactly what you're talking about. And just so you all know, these services are co-located, so you can get them right there at the Southwest Center, or you can come to our clinics, and all the clinicians are clinicians of colors or of color. So we have women and men.
Great. So they would call who? I know we better call Tyrone, but who do they call to get your services?
Call the Southwest Community Center. So I'll get the number and put it in the chat.
All right, great. Call the Southwest Community Center. And Dr. Ish, New York, Hollywood, whatever. Go ahead.
Yeah, man, I'm all over the place, man. I'm easy to find on Instagram. It's all the same name, Dr. Ish Major, Dr_ISH_MAJOR on Instagram. Same on Facebook, Dr. Ish Major on Twitter. Go to the website, drishmajor.com. Got a ton of free stuff, a lot of free resources you can download for free there, and getting a lot of good conversations going there. Got a really cool relationship program for couples and individuals. A take-home boot camp that I just launched. So go there, and for the nurse of the month is half off. And so, you know, everybody's been hit by the COVID crisis and the financial crunch. So go there for that. But yeah, man, I'm all over. I'm easy to find, and the new season will be up July 2nd. So we'll be right back in the thick of things.
All right. So the new season of Marriage Boot Camp Reality Stars. What night? What network?
Oh, WeTV, July 2nd. It is another hip hop season. It is probably the craziest season we've had so far, which keeping right in line with 2020. Thursday nights at 10 p.m. right after Grown Up Hip Hop.
10 p.m. Eastern Time.
Yes.
And the phone number for those in Syracuse, New York is 315-474-6823. I hope that this conversation tonight was an eye-opener for you. It was a space of healing and a place of comfort. One of Facebook is basically saying we are in this together. And I do agree that we're in this together. So I want to thank our panelists once again, Dr. Ish Major, Brandon Hollie, who is a PhD candidate, right, and an MBA student, Dr. Tyrone Grandison and Dr. Lawrence Jackson. And what y'all think? We need to get together again at some point, y'all think? What y'all think?
Absolutely, man. I enjoyed it, but I also learned a lot. You know what I mean? It was a lot of really good information, a lot of good professional information. That's the word that we don't get to hear in terms of ourselves a lot, right?
Right.
And so I think just visually for me, it was something I enjoyed. I hope we gave some folks some good information that was helpful. But yeah, I would love for something like this to be a regular thing, man. I really would. I think, and I appreciate you, George, for pulling us all together.
So thank you so much. And again, George Kilpatrick, Inspiration for the Nation. I'm on every Sunday morning, 9 on Power 620, soon to be 9 to 11. And you can follow me on, I have my whole name, George Kilpatrick Jr. on Instagram, Inspiration for the Nation on Facebook. And if you have further questions that you would like to ask of the therapist that you didn't get in, hit it up, throw it on Facebook. We'll have this recorded. We'll throw it up on YouTube with their permission. I got your permission, right? And we appreciate all of you. And again, what we tried to create today was a space for Black men and for healing. And I hope that even through some of what you heard, you have a space to find it. You know that these brothers are available to you to start that journey. And what they told me they wanted you to get out of this is that A, it's okay to be vulnerable, and B, if you need help and support, it's just a phone call away. And, we didn't get a chance to talk about this, but even when y'all first get in the room, there's a little dance that goes on, right? It's not, it doesn't happen, that opening up doesn't happen right away. But I think and I want to also thank Dr. Duane McClure. I want to make sure I thank him as well. And he mentioned that I think Brandon, someone else mentioned, we have to create those spaces where we have those conversations with one another. And I think Duane talked about it as, you got to have that I'm on the ledge about to jump 3 a.m. person you can call that'll help to talk you off the ledge. And we mean the ledge like you're going to jump, right? So I appreciate you all. Thank you all for coming on tonight. And I almost don't want to say goodbye, but I guess I have to. So thank you again, Inspiration for the Nation. I'm George Kilpatrick. Thank you for joining.
Thank you all.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate y'all.